Okay, so here we are in the book of Exodus. You'll notice our new green theme for Exodus. One, it'll be able to help you identify Exodus from the videos on Genesis. And also, I'm a big fan of progress. So you graduate from the blue videos and now you're already into the green videos. Okay, here it goes. So Exodus, we know, has 11 parshas. And in general, it deals with the nation of Israel. Exodus is the book where that family of 70 individuals that ended up in the land of Egypt at the end of Genesis is now about to be transformed into a nation. So it's the first book that really deals with the development of the nation of Israel. Let's begin with an overview of the book, and then we're going to focus on the first part. So parshas 1, 2, 3, and 4 deal with the Jewish experience in the land of Egypt. So it's going to be 4 parshas. Finally, we're going to get it out of Egypt. Parshas 5 and 6 is then a look at the story of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. This is where the Sinai experience happens. In Parshas 5 and 6, we'll see with the 10 Commandments. Then 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, these parshas then focus on the building of the tabernacle. Now, the tabernacle is a portable sanctuary that the Jews are going to build in the in the desert. God's going to give Moses the instructions on how to build this tabernacle. And it's not just a mere temple, but it's a place where God's presence will, so to speak, reside amongst the Jewish people in the desert. It's a home for God in the desert as we travel from the desert towards the land of Israel. So once again, the first 4 parshas, the Jews in the land of Egypt. 5 and 6, we get the Torah. Then 7 through 11, we're building the tabernacle. By the end of the book, the tabernacle will be completed and God's presence will descend upon it. And that's going to be the close of the book. So I want to pick up now with this video in terms of what happens in the land of Egypt. That's going to be our focus here. Now, when it comes to Egypt, just to get the breakdown clear, the Jews were in the land of Egypt for a grand total of 210 years. But it wasn't all slavery. The first 94 years was when things were pretty good. That begins with Joseph coming down, as we'll see, and then the family comes down. So there's 94 years before there's slavery, and then there's 116 years of slavery, and that's when we go through the terrible suffering in Egypt. So that's a grand total of 210 years. Now, Joseph arrived in the year 1522 BCE, and the Exodus occurred in 1312 BCE. So that's the 210 years that we are there. So we get out in the year 1312 BCE. How do we know that there were 94 years of, so to speak, good times before the slavery began? That's because tradition teaches that when the brothers came down, slavery was not to begin until they were all passed away. When all 12 of Jacob's sons passed away, that's when the decree of slavery begins. So the last brother to pass away was Levi, and when he passes away, that's 94 years into the 210 years. So when he passes away, we have 116 years left for the slavery. So that's the background. So the book of Exodus opens with a review of the Jews coming down with Jacob, his family, and then there's this rapid expansion. We're growing rapidly, and Pharaoh gets nervous. He says that the Jews will act as a fifth column. We might betray the Egyptians if they're ever attacked by another nation. And therefore, in Parsha 1, the enslavement begins. First, it begins with the labor. He's going to give us a lot of labor, and hopefully we'll stop having children as a result. Then that doesn't work, so he gives us back-breaking labor. That still doesn't work. Then he decrees, he has the midwives, Jewish midwives, try to kill the babies at birth, but they don't listen. And finally, the decree comes that he's going to drown all the newborn baby males in the Nile. Moses is born at that point. He's saved by being put in a basket, and he sails down the river Nile. He ends up being saved by the Egyptian princess Basia, who's the daughter of Pharaoh, and she ends up raising Moses, who's the future redeemer of the Jewish people, right under Pharaoh's nose in the palace of Egypt. Still in this first parsha, Moses grows up, and as he sees the Jewish people suffering, he ends up protecting them. He sees an Egyptian assaulting a Jew. He kills the Egyptian. He has to run for his life, and he ends up running away from Egypt to the land of Midian. And when he's in Midian, he ends up meeting his future wife Tzipporah. He gets married there. His father-in-law is Jethro, and he stays there in Midian until the age of 80. And then the age of 80, that's when God appears to him. Still, this is all back here in Parsha 1. We have the burning bush. God comes to him at a burning bush that isn't being consumed by the fire and tells him, you must go down to Egypt to get my people out from Egypt. Moses eventually goes down. He's reluctant. He feels there's other people that are better suited than he, But he ends up going down, and when he appears in front of Pharaoh, after raising the spirits of the Jewish people that the Redeemer has come, Pharaoh only makes things worse. He says, I don't know your God, I don't know you. And he says the Jewish people have too much time on their hands, and therefore he increases the burden on them. He doesn't give us the materials to maintain our quotas. We have to maintain the same quotas, and things get worse. So that's all the background by Parsha number 1. By the end of that Parsha, the Jewish people are upset with Moses for making things worse for them. Moses is upset with God for making things worse. And then Parsha 2 begins the story of the 10 plagues. God says, now you're going to see what I'm going to do. And we have the first 7 plagues. Now, here are the 7 plagues. You have, first of all, the blood, which is the Nile turning into blood. The Nile was the god of Egypt, so that was pretty destructive. Then you have frogs swarming the land. Then you have lice. The 4th plague was wild animals that attack. And then pestilence wipes out a lot of the animals. 6 is boils. And the 7th was hail, which destroyed a lot of the crops. Then in Parsha 3, we have the 3 plagues and the Exodus. So the last 3 plagues were locusts swarming the land, eating up whatever was left from the hail. The 9th was darkness, a very thick darkness that descended on the land. At a certain point, no one could move anymore. They were frozen in their spot, except for the Jews. And then the 10th plague was death of the firstborn of Egypt. And that's when the Jewish people are celebrating their first Passover, where God passed over their homes and took away the firstborn of Egypt. Now I want to point out that in the 3rd Parsha, we have the first commandments given to the Jewish people. Most of them focus around the holiday of Passover, but we have the first one, which is sanctify the new moon, which is how we keep track of the calendar through the lunar cycle. So we finally get out of Egypt in Parsha 3, and Parsha 4 is the splitting of the Red Sea. What happens is God leads us up to the sea. It looks like we're trapped. It's really a trap to get the Egyptians out after us one more time. And when they're right on our heels, the waters split miraculously. We pass through on dry land, and they come in through the sea, and the waters come back crashing on the Egyptians. I always like to say that in Parsha 3, we got the Jews out of Egypt, but in Parsha 4, we got the Egyptian out of the Jew. Because when we see our taskmasters go down in the water, we're finally more like psychologically free from the Egyptians than we ever were before. So that's Parsha 4, the splitting of the Red Sea. Okay, so let's do a little review. I'm going to get rid of everything we've written up until now, and we'll start from the very beginning and get the overview of Exodus. So here goes. Exodus has 11 parshas. It deals with the beginnings of the nation of Israel. The first 4 parshas are the Jews in the land of Egypt. 5 and 6, we get the Torah. And then 7 through 11, we're building the tabernacle. Back in Egypt, those 210 years, we have 94 before slavery, and then 116 years of slavery. Joseph arrived in 1522, and the Exodus occurred in 1312 BCE. Parsha 1 is the enslavement. Parsha 2 is the first 7 plagues, which we said was blood, frogs, lice, then wild animals and pestilence, and then boils and hail. And then Parsha 3 is the next 3 plagues and the Exodus. The 3 plagues are locusts, darkness, and then death of the firstborn. And Parsha 4, we have the splitting of the Red Sea. Okay, that's our review. Then we're going to pick up in the next video and look how we were transformed from a slave nation and how we eventually arrive at the foot of Mount Sinai to get the Torah.